The night descends quietly. Somewhere outside, rain is beginning to fall. Not heavily, just a soft, patient rain, the kind that settles on roof tiles and runs gently down stone paths, filling the silence with a sound like breathing. You are warm, you are still. And tonight, we are going to travel together into one of the most beautiful and most untranslatable ideas in all of human thought. We are going to speak of wabi-sabi. Perhaps you have heard this word before. Perhaps you have not. Either way, I would ask you to set aside whatever you think you already know and simply let yourself be carried. Because wabi-sabi is not really a concept that can be grasped all at once. It is more like the way morning mist lifts from a mountain, slowly and with great patience, and only when the conditions are exactly right. Here is one small thing to hold in mind as we begin. In 1994, an American designer named Leonard Koren published a small book titled Wabi-Sabi for Artists, Designers, Poets, and Philosophers. It was the first serious attempt in the English language to define and explain wabi-sabi to a Western audience. The book sold quietly at first. Then it never stopped selling. It has been in print for over 30 years now, and it is still among the most read books on Japanese aesthetics in the Western world. Yet within Japan itself, the book was largely unknown for decades. Many Japanese people, upon learning that this quiet American book about a Japanese concept had been circulating for a generation in universities and design schools and art studios around the world, were genuinely surprised. The beauty that was too close to see, too familiar to name, had been quietly admired from far away all along. Let us begin there, in the space between what is too close to name and what can only be seen from a distance. To understand wabi-sabi, we must first understand that it is not one word, but two. Wabi and sabi arrived in the Japanese language separately, from different directions, and carried quite different meanings before they were ever joined together. Their union was not planned. It was more like the way two rivers, running parallel for a long time through different landscapes, eventually find each other and merge into something neither could have become alone. The word wabi is old, very old. In its earliest recorded uses in classical Japanese poetry from around the 8th and 9th centuries, wabi did not mean something beautiful. It meant something closer to loneliness, to desolation, to the particular sorrow of being left behind, abandoned in a cold house, forgotten by the world. The word appeared in poetry written by monks and wanderers, people living at the margins of society, people who had either chosen or been forced into a life of poverty and simplicity. In those early poems, wabi was not a state to be sought. It was a state to be endured. But something changed. Slowly, across centuries, and here we are speaking of a transformation so gradual that no single person could be credited with causing it. The meaning of wabi began to shift. The loneliness began to acquire a kind of dignity. The desolation began to look, in certain lights, like freedom. If you have nothing, you cannot lose anything. If your room is bare, there is nothing to distract you from the silence. The poverty that had once seemed shameful began to seem, to a certain kind of contemplative mind, like a form of liberation. This shift was not unconnected to the spread of Zen Buddhism through Japan. Zen arrived from China and Korea and took root in Japanese soil in a way that would eventually reshape almost every dimension of Japanese culture, from gardens to architecture, to the way tea was drunk. And one of Zen's central teachings was precisely this: that attachment is the source of suffering, that the beautiful and the transient are not opposites, but the same thing, that the cracked cup is not less than the perfect cup. It is, in a certain sense, more, because it knows something the perfect cup does not. Sabi has its own history, equally ancient. The word comes from a root meaning to rust, or to wither, or to become desolate with age. In early usage, sabi described the cold and lonely quality of things that had been left too long alone. A garden no one tended, a road no one walked, a letter no one answered. Like wabi, it began as a word for loss. But there is a poet we must speak of before we go further. His name was Matsuo Bashō, and he lived in the 17th century. And he is perhaps the single most important figure in the transformation of sabi from a word for sadness into a word for a certain kind of quiet, luminous beauty. Basho was a wanderer. He walked thousands of kilometers through Japan over the course of his life, writing haiku, those small, compressed poems that attempt to hold the whole weight of a moment, in 17 syllables. And in his poems, sabi became something extraordinary. His most famous haiku, perhaps the most famous poem in the Japanese language, reads, in one translation, an old silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash. Silence again. In that moment, in that sound, the brief disturbance of a frog and then the return to silence, Basho captured something essential about sabi. It is not simply age or decay. It is the quality of quietness that has been deepened by time. The silence after the splash is not the same silence as before. It has been made more present, more acute, by the brief interruption. That is sabi, the way things become more themselves through the passage of time and through the small, quiet moments that mark that passage. Basho himself was ill for much of his life. He suffered from digestive problems that made long journeys genuinely painful. He was not performing the role of the wandering poet. He was that poet, in all the discomfort and uncertainty the role entailed. And perhaps this is why his poems carry such an authentic weight. He was not imagining loneliness from a comfortable room. He knew it in his body. There is a detail about Basho's famous journey to the deep north, immortalized in his travel diary, Oku no Hosomichi, often translated as the narrow road to the deep north, that most readers outside Japan do not know. When he set out on this journey in 1689, at the age of 45, he was traveling to a region that was, at the time, genuinely remote and difficult. Not the domesticated countryside it would later become, but the far north of Honshu, a landscape of cold mountains and ancient temples and roads that petered out into forest. He made the trip knowing he was in poor health. He had, according to some accounts, put his affairs in order before departing, sold his house, said his farewells, as though he were not entirely certain he would return. The journey he was undertaking was not tourism. It was something closer to pilgrimage, or to dying well. He did return. He wrote the diary. And the diary became one of the most read and beloved works in Japanese literature. But it carries within it the particular quality that comes from having been written under the awareness of mortality. The attention that only sharpens when you know your time is finite. Every ruined castle he visited, every temple fallen to decay, every overgrown path that had once been a great road. Basho looked at these things with eyes that understood impermanence, not as an abstraction but as an experience. That is sabi. And that is also wabi-sabi, the beauty that is deepened by the knowledge that it will end. By the time the words wabi and sabi began to appear together, first in poetry, then in aesthetic discourse, something important had happened to both of them. Each had made its quiet journey from sorrow to beauty. Each had been refined by centuries of use, stripped of its more desperate connotations, and left with something purer. The beauty of the simple, the old, the imperfect, and the transient. And then came tea. It is difficult to overstate the importance of the tea ceremony, chado, the way of tea, in shaping Japanese aesthetics. Tea had been drunk in Japan since at least the 9th century, when it arrived from China as a kind of medicinal drink favored by Buddhist monks who needed to stay awake during long meditation sessions. But it was not until the 15th and 16th centuries that tea drinking became something more than a habit, something that aspired to be an art form, a spiritual practice, a complete philosophy of beauty. The man most responsible for this transformation was a tea master named Murata Juko, who lived in the 15th century and was one of the first to articulate what he called the spirit of harmony between host and guest, between the object and the moment. Juko is credited with beginning the shift from the ostentatious, gold-encrusted tea gatherings favored by the wealthy and powerful towards something simpler, quieter, more inward. He reportedly said, and here I should acknowledge that the exact attribution is uncertain, that the moon behind clouds is more beautiful than the moon fully revealed. Not the perfect, brilliant thing, the partially hidden thing, the thing that asks you to complete it with your imagination. But it was a later tea master, a man born around 1522 in the city of Sakai, who would transform these ideas into something close to a revolution. His name was Sen no Rikyū, and he may be the most important figure in the entire history of Japanese aesthetics. Rikyū came from a family of merchants and fish dealers. Not the nobility, not the monks, but the commercial class that was beginning to accumulate both wealth and cultural influence in 16th century Japan. He studied tea under several masters, absorbed everything they could teach him, and then began, slowly and deliberately, to push further. He was not content to refine what had come before. He wanted to arrive at something essential, what Rikyū created, and this took decades of experimentation, of deep thought, of thousands of tea gatherings in spaces he designed himself, was an aesthetic framework that deliberately overturned almost everything the wealthy and powerful valued. Where they prized Chinese objects, elegant, refined, expensive imports that announced the taste and money of their owners, Rikyū prized Japanese objects. Simple ones, rough ones, objects that a refined eye might not even recognize as beautiful at first glance. He built tea rooms that were tiny. The most famous measured only 4.5 tatami mats, barely enough space for a few people to sit together. He designed tea rooms with low entrances, so low that any guest, no matter how powerful, had to bow to enter. A samurai lord entering a tea room designed by Rikyū had to leave his sword outside and stoop to fit through the door. In that moment of bowing, the hierarchy of the world outside was set aside. Inside the tea room, there was only the tea, the moment, and the quiet company of other human beings. There is a story, and it is one of those stories where the boundary between historical fact and cherished legend is difficult to determine, but the truth it carries feels unmistakable. about Rikyū and a garden of morning glories. A wealthy and powerful lord heard that Rikyū had cultivated a remarkable garden of morning glories, famous throughout the city for their beauty. The lord arranged to visit one morning to see them. When he arrived, he found the garden completely bare. Every single morning glory had been cut. He was shown into the tea room, and there, in the alcove, in a simple vase, was a single morning glory, displayed alone. This is wabi-sabi in action. Not the spectacle of 100 flowers, but the silence made eloquent by one. Not the abundance, but the distillation. Not the perfection of a full garden, but the quiet, exact beauty of the single thing, chosen with care, placed with precision, and surrounded by emptiness that made it impossible to look at anything else. Rikyū understood something that is both simple and radical, that beauty is not the property of things. It is something that happens between a thing and a person, in a specific moment, in a specific quality of attention. The most beautiful object in the world, viewed without attention, is just an object. The most ordinary object in the world, viewed with complete and quiet attention, can stop your heart. His influence was enormous. The aesthetic he shaped, sparse, quiet, imperfect, deeply intentional, became the foundation of what we now call wabi-sabi, and it spread far beyond the tea room. It shaped the design of gardens. It shaped architecture. It shaped the kinds of ceramics that were made and valued. It shaped the way flowers were arranged. It became, in time, something like the hidden grammar of Japanese visual culture. Let us pause here and consider the objects themselves. Because wabi-sabi is not only a philosophy, it is also a way of looking at things. And when you know how to look, you begin to see it everywhere. A tea bowl in the wabi-sabi tradition is rarely symmetrical. It may be slightly lopsided, hand-shaped rather than wheel-thrown, carrying the faint impression of the potter's fingers. Its glaze may be uneven, running thick in some places and thin in others, pooling at the base in a way that was not entirely planned. There may be small cracks in the surface, or tiny pits where bubbles in the clay broke during firing. These are not defects to be hidden. They are what makes the bowl itself. There's a practice in Japanese ceramics called kintsugi, which you may have heard of. When a precious ceramic object breaks, a tea bowl, a vase, a sake cup, the broken pieces are reassembled, and the cracks are filled with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The repaired object does not hide its damage. The golden lines trace the history of every break, every fall, every moment of accident or carelessness. The repaired bowl becomes, in a way, more beautiful than it was before. Not in spite of its damage, but because of it. The damage is now part of the object's story, made visible, made precious. Kintsugi is wabi-sabi made literal. The wound becomes the ornament. The practice of kintsugi is believed to have originated in the late 15th or early 16th century, at roughly the same time that the tea ceremony was being shaped into the form we recognize today. One account, and it is presented with the caveat that the precise historical record is uncertain, suggests that a shogun, having broken a beloved Chinese tea bowl and sent it to China for repair, received it back held together with ugly metal staples. Dissatisfied, he reportedly commissioned Japanese craftsmen to find a more beautiful solution. Whether or not this specific story is accurate in all its details, the spirit of it feels right. Someone looked at damage, and instead of hiding it, decided to make it the most beautiful part. What is particularly interesting about kintsugi as a practice is that it is not merely cosmetic. The gold lacquer used to fill the cracks is a genuine adhesive. The bowl is actually stronger after repair than a bowl that has never been broken. The cracks, once filled and cured, are among the most durable parts of the object. The vulnerability that was exposed in the breaking has been, in the repair, transformed into resilience. This is not metaphor, it is material science. But it is hard not to read it as something more. There is something here worth holding gently in the mind as the night deepens around you. We live in a world that spends enormous energy trying to hide damage. The scratch is covered. The scar is minimized. The gray hair is colored. The wrinkle is smoothed. The old building is demolished and replaced with something new and uniform, and without history. We have become very good at the performance of wholeness, of seamlessness, of surfaces that betray no evidence of having lived. And against this, WABI-SABI stands quietly and says, the crack is where the light comes in. The roughness is where your fingers remember they are alive. The imperfect thing is the thing that breathes. Now, let us consider moss. If you have ever walked through an old Japanese garden, or even looked at photographs of one, you will know that moss is everywhere. It covers the stones. It climbs the bases of the stone lanterns. It softens the edges of things, rounds what was sharp, blurs what was defined. In most of the world, moss on a garden stone would suggest neglect, not maintenance. In the wabi-sabi aesthetic, moss is actively cultivated. It is tended. It is, in its patient, unhurried way, considered beautiful precisely because it could only have arrived through time. Moss cannot be rushed. You cannot buy old moss and apply it. You can only wait for it. This is essential. The moss announces, this place has been here long enough for living things to settle into it, to choose it, to make it their home. The moss is the garden's autobiography, written in a slow green hand across every surface it has chosen to inhabit. Older Japanese gardens. And here we might think of the great gardens of Kyoto, places like Ryoanji with its famous rock garden, or the moss garden of Saihoji, which has been growing since the 14th century, carry a quality that newer gardens simply cannot possess. They have absorbed time. The stones have settled. The trees have grown into their exact proportion. The paths have been worn smooth by centuries of quiet feet. There is a gravity to these places, a presence, that has nothing to do with design and everything to do with age. The garden of Saihoji, known informally as Kokedera, the moss temple, is worth dwelling on for a moment. It was originally built in the 8th century, but it was a tea master and Zen monk named Muso Soseki who redesigned it in the 14th century and gave it its current character. The garden contains over 120 species of moss, and in the right light, particularly after rain or in the soft green glow of early morning, it has a quality that visitors consistently describe as otherworldly. Many people cry when they enter it, apparently without understanding why. This is not, I think, an unusual response to wabi-sabi. Sometimes beauty bypasses the thinking mind entirely and goes somewhere deeper, somewhere that has no language, only feeling. It is worth mentioning here that Saihoji requires a formal application to visit and limits the number of visitors each day. You must write a letter in advance, requesting permission. You must arrive and participate in a short copying of Buddhist scripture before entering the garden. This is not merely a tourist management strategy. It is the garden protecting itself, ensuring that the people who enter it arrive prepared, having already been asked to be quiet and intentional. The garden will not hurry for you. You must slow down to meet it. This quality of slowing down is, I think, one of the most important things that wabi-sabi asks of us. Not just the aesthetics, the rough surfaces and the golden cracks and the imperfect bowls, but the pace. The willingness to be still long enough for quiet things to reveal themselves. Because quiet things do not shout, they wait. Let us speak for a moment about a concept closely related to wabi-sabi, one that exists in a kind of quiet dialogue with it. The concept is mono no aware, which is sometimes translated as the pathos of things, or the bittersweet awareness of transience. It is a phrase from classical Japanese literature. It appears in the writings of the 11th century noblewoman Murasaki Shikibu, author of The Tale of Genji, which is often described as the world's first novel. Mono no aware is the feeling that arises when you are fully aware that the beautiful thing in front of you will not last. The cherry blossoms are beautiful, but their beauty is inseparable from the fact that they will fall within days. The light on the water at this particular hour will never occur in exactly this configuration again. The child who runs laughing across the garden will grow up. The person you love will one day be gone. This is not, in Japanese culture, a reason to look away. It is a reason to look more carefully. The transience is not the tragedy of the thing. It is part of its nature, and to acknowledge it is to honor it. To feel mono no aware is to be fully present to the experience of being alive in all its beauty and all its sorrow at once. Wabi-sabi and mono no aware are not the same thing, but they live in the same neighborhood of the spirit. Wabi-sabi is concerned with objects and spaces, the way they age, the way they bear the marks of time and use and imperfection. Mono no aware is concerned with the feeling that arises in the presence of those objects and spaces. Together, they form a kind of complete aesthetic philosophy. Look at the imperfect thing, see its age, feel the passing of time it embodies, and let that feeling open something in you. The cherry blossom festivals of Japan, hanami, the practice of gathering beneath the flowering trees to eat and drink and be together, carry both wabi-sabi and mono no aware within them. The trees in full bloom are not wabi-sabi in themselves. They are, in that moment, genuinely spectacular. But the Japanese relationship to them is shaped by the knowledge that they will fall. Forecasters track the bloom front as it moves north through Japan each spring, and people plan their gatherings to coincide not with the height of the bloom, but with the moment just before the petals begin to fall. Because that, many Japanese people will tell you, is the most beautiful moment, when the beauty is at its fullest, and you can already feel it beginning to let go. Now let us consider what wabi-sabi looks like in architecture, because it is there too. Not always obviously, but persistently. Traditional Japanese architecture has a quality of incompleteness that is, I suspect, difficult to describe adequately to anyone who has not spent time inside it. The materials are impermanent by design. Wood, bamboo, paper, clay. They are not meant to last forever. They are meant to age gracefully, to absorb the seasons, to need maintenance and repair and eventual replacement. The paper screens that filter the light do not block the world. They soften it. The wooden floors that creak underfoot are not a sign of poor construction. They are alive with use. There's a famous quality in Japanese architecture called ma, which is sometimes translated as negative space. But this translation does not capture it fully. Ma is not merely the absence of something, it's the presence of emptiness, a pause in music, the gap between two stones in a garden path, the shadow in the corner of a room. Ma is the space that gives meaning to what surrounds it, the way silence gives meaning to sound. And in traditional Japanese spaces, Ma is as carefully considered as any object or material. What is left out is as important as what is put in. The guest rooms of old ryokan, the traditional inns that still exist in various states of preservation throughout Japan, often embody this quality. A room with a tatami floor and a single scroll in the alcove and a low window looking out at a garden. Nothing extra. Nothing that does not belong. The room does not perform. It simply exists. And in existing, it creates the conditions for a certain kind of quiet that is very difficult to find anywhere else. I should say here that not all old Japanese things are wabi-sabi. There is an important distinction to be drawn. Wabi-sabi is not simply age or decay. A falling down building is not wabi-sabi merely because it is old and damaged. What makes something wabi-sabi is not the condition of the object alone, but the quality of attention with which it is approached. The recognition of beauty and imperfection requires a certain kind of seeing, one that has been cultivated, practiced, refined. It is not automatic. It is, in a way, a skill. This is perhaps why wabi-sabi is so difficult to translate, not just linguistically, but culturally. It is not simply a style. It is not a trend, though it has certainly been treated as one in design circles in the West. It is a way of being in relation to the world, a practice of attention, and like all practices, it requires time and patience, and the willingness to sit with something that does not immediately announce itself as beautiful. Let us talk about the ceramic tradition more fully, because it is here that wabi-sabi is perhaps most legible for those encountering it for the first time. Japanese ceramics have a history of extraordinary complexity and variety, but the wares most associated with the wabi-sabi aesthetic come from a particular tradition that developed around the tea ceremony in the 16th and 17th centuries. One of the most celebrated types of tea bowl is called Raku wara, a style invented, according to tradition, by a craftsman named Chojiro in 16th century Kyoto, working under the direct influence of Sen no Rikyū. Raku bowls are hand-shaped, not thrown on a wheel, and fired at relatively low temperatures. The result is a soft, matte surface that does not gleam. The glaze is often black or dark red, with unpredictable variations created by the firing process. The bowls are irregular in shape, slightly asymmetrical, with a quality that makes them look almost casual, as if they had grown rather than been made. When you hold a raku bowl, and here I should say that the experience of holding one is considered part of the aesthetic encounter, not incidental to it, it is immediately clear that it was made by human hands. The shape fits the palm not because it was engineered to do so, but because it was shaped by another pair of hands. And hands recognize each other. There is warmth in the encounter. There is presence. You are not holding a product. You are holding a record of a specific morning in a specific studio, when a specific person made a specific series of decisions. And those decisions have survived in the object you are holding now, in this moment. This continuity of human presence through the object is another dimension of wabi-sabi that is worth sitting with. When we encounter an old object, a worn wooden tool, a repaired ceramic vessel, a faded piece of cloth. We are, in a certain sense, in contact with the people who used it before us. Their hands are in the ware, their lives are in the patina. The object carries time the way a river carries the memory of every rain that has ever fallen upstream. We are not the first to hold this. We will not be the last. There is a word in Japanese, tenokyoku, which means the memory of hands. It refers to the way skilled craft workers carry knowledge in their hands rather than in their minds. The precise angle of a blade, the exact pressure of a thumb on clay, the feel of wood grain through a planing tool. This knowledge cannot be fully written down or taught in words. It passes from master to apprentice through years of proximity and practice. And when it passes into an object, when the master's hands make something, a trace of that knowledge is preserved there. The object remembers. Wabi-sabi is, at its heart, a philosophy that takes this kind of memory seriously. It says that the traces of making, of using, of aging, of repair, these are not blemishes to be eliminated. They are the evidence of life. A table that has been used for 50 years carries the memory of every meal ever eaten at it. A garden path that has been walked for 100 years carries the cumulative intention of everyone who ever chose to walk there. These things have meaning that no new thing can possess, and to smooth them away, to replace them with something pristine and unmarked, is not an improvement. It is a kind of forgetting. This philosophical dimension of wabi-sabi becomes particularly resonant, I think, when we consider the world we actually live in. We are surrounded, most of us, by objects that have been designed to appear perfect and to hide every evidence of their making. The seam is invisible, the join is seamless, the material is engineered to age in controlled, predictable ways, or more often, simply to fail entirely after a certain number of years and require replacement. We live among things that pretend to be without history, without making, without imperfection. And yet we are drawn, again and again, to the other kind of thing. To the rough pottery mug that a friend made by hand. To the worn leather bag that has developed a particular softness over years of use. To the old wooden floor with its record of footsteps. To the garden wall with its accumulation of moss and lichen. To the inherited object that carries the particular weight of having belonged to someone else before it belonged to us. We are drawn to these things because they speak to us about time and impermanence and the human presence embedded in matter. They remind us that we too are imperfect. We too are transient. We too are in the process of becoming something more interesting than we were when we began. Here is something worth knowing about the objects that Rikyū valued most. At a time when the most coveted tea implements were Chinese imports, glazed, symmetrical, expensive, carrying the weight of continental prestige. Rikyū made his most radical aesthetic statement by elevating objects that no one had previously looked at twice. Korean rice bowls. Humble, everyday vessels used by ordinary people to eat plain food. He looked at these unpretentious things, imperfectly formed, often with drips and irregularities in the glaze where the kiln had done unexpected things, and declared them beautiful. More than beautiful, ideal, perfect for tea, precisely because they were not trying to be perfect. This was more than an aesthetic judgment. It was a social provocation. The lords and generals who attended Rikyū's tea gatherings were being asked to take pleasure in the same kind of bowl that a Korean peasant might eat rice from. To find beauty in the humble, the unassuming, the ordinary. to look past the signals of status and value and discover something that status and value could not create. It is, in its quiet way, a radical act of attention, and it is one that remains possible for anyone, at any moment, without any special equipment or training. Only the willingness to look. This is perhaps the deepest gift of wabi-sabi, not just a way of looking at objects, but a way of looking at ourselves. The philosophy that finds beauty in imperfection does not stop at bowls and gardens. It can be turned inward. The crack in you, the sorrow, the failure, the part of you that did not turn out the way you planned, can be seen in a different light. Not as what is wrong with you, as what makes you interesting, as what makes you human, as the golden seam. We should speak of a figure who embodies this idea in an almost implausibly perfect way, because history occasionally produces people who seem to exist primarily to illustrate a philosophical point. His name was Ogata Kenzan, and he was a ceramicist who worked in Kyoto in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. His elder brother was Ogata Koren, a celebrated painter and designer, wildly successful in his lifetime, whose bold, gorgeous decorative work represents almost the opposite aesthetic sensibility from wabi-sabi. Exuberant, colorful, lavishly beautiful. Kenzan began working in ceramics relatively late in life, after the family fortune had been largely dissipated, and he produced work that was entirely his own. Simple, rough, asymmetrical, decorated with poems and paintings, in an informal hand that looked almost like a child's drawings, compared to the polished mastery of his famous brother. His bowls and dishes do not announce themselves. They sit quietly, slightly awkward, genuine in a way that more polished objects rarely achieve. And today, centuries later, his work is among the most celebrated in Japanese ceramic history. He is beloved not in spite of his roughness, but because of it. Because the roughness was true, there is something deeply human in this story. The more polished brother, the more celebrated one in his own time, has become a historical figure, admired, studied, placed behind glass. The quieter brother, the rougher one, has become something people feel. That is wabi-sabi too. Let us consider, as the night deepens further around you, what it might mean to actually live with a wabi-sabi sensibility. Not just to appreciate it aesthetically, not just to understand it intellectually, but to allow it to change something in the way you move through the ordinary hours of your days. A wabi-sabi sensibility, I think, begins with slowness, with the willingness to be still enough that quiet things can make themselves known to you. The moss on the stone, the particular quality of winter light through a window, the worn place on the wooden banister where generations of hands have rested. These things are everywhere, in every house, in every life. But they are easy to miss when we are moving fast, when we are looking for the spectacular, when we have been trained to notice only what is new and bright and perfect. It continues with a kind of acceptance, not passivity, not resignation, but the specific quality of attention that comes when you are not busy fighting the reality of what is in front of you. The old house is old. The beloved face has aged. The beautiful thing will pass. When you stop arguing with these facts, when you turn toward them with curiosity rather than resistance, something opens. The quality of the moment changes. What was a problem becomes a presence. What was something to be fixed becomes something to be held. And it extends, I think, to the relationship we have with our own incompleteness. There is, in many of us, a persistent and quietly exhausting effort to present a complete self, to appear finished, polished, without visible seams or cracks. Wabi-sabi offers a different possibility, that the unfinished quality of a human life is not a failure of the project. It is the nature of the project. We are not meant to be complete. We are meant to be in process, growing, aging, wearing, being repaired, accumulating the patina of lived experience. The most interesting people you will ever meet will be the ones who show you their cracks, who do not pretend to be seamless, who have let time do its work on them, and who wear the evidence of it without apology, who are, in the old sense of the word, genuine, which originally meant not artificially made, not forged, not performed, real. There is a particular quality of beauty that only age can give, and it has no name in English that quite captures it. The Japanese word for it, or at least the nearest approximation, since wabi-sabi itself resists definition, carries within it the whole philosophy we have been exploring tonight. The thing that has been used and worn and cracked and repaired and used again. The thing that knows what it is. The thing that does not need to be perfect because it has become entirely itself. Sen no Rikyū, the great tea master we spoke of earlier, met his end in a way that was itself, in retrospect, remarkably wabi-sabi. After years of enormous influence over the most powerful figures in Japan, particularly the warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who both admired and feared him, Rikyū fell from favor in 1591. The exact reasons remain disputed by historians. Some suggest it was a disagreement over the placement of a wooden statue above a gate through which Hideyoshi would pass. Some suggest political intrigue. Some suggest that Rikyū had simply become too influential, too central, too difficult to control for a man like Hideyoshi to tolerate. Whatever the reason, Rikyū was ordered by Hideyoshi to commit ritual suicide. He was 70 years old, and what he did, in those final hours, was hold a tea gathering. He invited a small group of disciples and shared tea with them one last time, with full formality and complete attention. At the end of the gathering, he gave each guest a tea implement as a farewell gift. Then, when the guests had gone, he broke his own tea bowl, the bowl from which he had served tea for the last time, so that it could never be used by anyone else. It had held that moment, and that moment only. It did not need to continue. There is something almost unbearable about this story, and also something very quiet and clear. Rikyū approached his death the way he had approached tea, with simplicity, with intention, with the understanding that the beauty of a moment lies precisely in its finitude. The tea gathering was beautiful because it was the last one. The bowl was precious because it was broken. The life was complete, not because it reached a natural end, but because, at its actual end, it was fully inhabited. We are storytellers. We cannot know exactly what was in Rikyū's mind as he prepared to die that evening in 1591, but we can hold the story and feel the quality of it and let it say what it says to us, quietly, without argument, in the stillness of this particular night. The concept of wabi-sabi has traveled far from the tea rooms of 16th century Kyoto. It has entered the vocabulary of architects and product designers, of interior decorators and philosophers, of people in cities all over the world who are trying to articulate a feeling they have about what is missing from the smooth, relentless perfection of modern life. It has been applied, sometimes clumsily, sometimes beautifully, to everything from furniture design to digital interfaces to personal development philosophies. There is a risk, of course, in all this travel. The risk of becoming a style without substance, of being reduced to a set of visual cues, linen fabric, rough ceramics, dried botanicals, that signal wabi-sabi without enacting it. A perfectly curated Instagram image of an artfully cracked bowl is not wabi-sabi, however beautiful it may be. It is the performance of wabi-sabi, which is nearly its opposite. The real thing requires time, requires attention, requires the willingness to sit with something that does not immediately reveal itself. It cannot be purchased or designed into existence. It arrives slowly, in the space between what was planned and what actually happened, between the perfect object you intended to make and the imperfect living thing that came out of the kiln instead. The Japanese novelist Yasunari Kawabata, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1968, the first Japanese writer to do so, said in his Nobel acceptance speech, speaking of the Japanese aesthetic tradition, "Not a single one of my novels has what might be called a happy ending." He was not lamenting this. He was describing the nature of the aesthetic he had inherited, one that found truth not in resolution, but in the ongoing, unfinished quality of things. The beauty that he described was not the beauty of completion. It was the beauty of incompletion, of the story that continues, quietly, beyond the last page. There is in Japan a concept called shun, the idea that every food has a peak moment, a brief window of perfect ripeness or freshness, and that eating it at that exact moment is qualitatively different from eating it before or after. The first bamboo shoots of spring, the matsutake mushroom found in the particular week of autumn when the temperature drops just enough. The new season's tea, picked in the early morning of the first warm day. The Japanese kitchen has always been organized around shun in a way that most other food cultures have not. Not just because the ingredients taste better at their peak, but because eating them then is an acknowledgement of time. It is a way of saying, I am here, in this exact moment, which will not come again. I am paying attention. This relationship between food and seasonality is another thread of wabi-sabi woven through daily life. There is something wabi-sabi about eating strawberries only in strawberry season. Not the engineered strawberries available every month of the year, grown under artificial light in a controlled environment, but the ones that arrive in spring with the freshness of something that is actually grown in actual earth under actual sun, and that carry in their flavor the specific weather of this particular year. The slight variation, the occasional imperfect shape, the brief window of availability, these are not deficits. They are what makes the strawberry itself. The Japanese concept of shun extends to experiences, not just foods. There is a particular quality of light in late autumn in Japan, when the maples are turning and the air is cold and dry and bright, that has no equivalent in other seasons. There is a quality of summer evenings, when the heat finally eases and people carry lanterns to float on rivers in memory of the dead, that belongs entirely to that season and that evening. These experiences are valued partly because they are brief, partly because they require being in the right place at the right time, and partly because they will not be replicated exactly. Next year's maple season will be different. Next year's lantern festival will be different. This year's version is already passing, even as you stand within it. To live with a wabi-sabi sensibility is to live in this kind of relationship with time, attentive to the specific texture of the present, aware of its transience, grateful for what is here, precisely because it will not always be. This is not a sad way to live. It is, I think, a full way to live. The sadness and the beauty are not separate. They are the same thing, held in both hands at once. There's a type of garden found in many traditional Japanese homes. Small, enclosed, designed to be viewed from inside the house through a window or sliding screen. These gardens are called tsubo niwa, and they are often extraordinarily small, sometimes barely larger than a closet. A single stone, a bamboo and stone lantern, a plant or two, a small path of stepping stones leading nowhere in particular. The tsuboniwa is not a place you go into. It is a place you look at. And in looking at it, in these small enclosed gardens, visible from the interior of daily life but not entered or used, there is something about the relationship between the enclosed and the open, the inhabited and the wild, the daily and the eternal. The garden looks back at you. It has time. You are the transient one, passing through the house on your way to somewhere else. The stone will be there long after you have gone. There is one more small thing worth knowing about these enclosed gardens. In the merchant townhouses of old Kyoto, the machiya, those long, narrow wooden buildings that ran deep from the street front into the block behind, the tsuboniwa served not only an aesthetic purpose but a practical one. They brought light and ventilation into the deep interior of buildings that had no windows facing the street. The beautiful garden was also, quietly, a solution to a functional problem. The aesthetics and the practicality were not in conflict. They were the same gesture. This too is wabi-sabi, the solution that is also a poem. Let us rest here for a moment. In the quiet of that image, you are lying down. The rain continues outside, the soft, patient rain that began at the start of this night and has not stopped. Somewhere in the darkness, moss is growing on stones. Somewhere, a tea bowl with a golden seam is sitting in the darkness of a museum case, remembering the morning it was dropped. Somewhere, a garden that has been growing for 600 years is breathing through the night, its hundreds of mosses drinking the rain. Before we reach the end of our journey tonight, I want to speak briefly about one more dimension of wabi-sabi that is often overlooked: its relationship to sound and to silence. Japan has a long tradition of paying exquisite attention to sound. There's a formal list, compiled during the Edo period, of the 100 best sounds in Japan. The haiku ishu of listening, you might say. The list includes sounds you might expect: the sound of wind in pine trees, the sound of a temple bell crossing a valley at dusk, the sound of rain on a lotus pond. But it also includes sounds you might not expect. The sound of tofu being made at dawn in an old neighborhood, the creak of a wooden comb passing through hair, the particular hollow sound that a wooden clog makes on a stone bridge at night. These sounds were catalogued not because they were spectacular, but because they were beautiful in a quiet way, because they captured something of the texture of ordinary life at a particular time and place, because they would inevitably be lost. The person who compiled such a list was already mourning while celebrating. That is mono no aware. That is also wabi-sabi. The haiku tradition, too, is deeply concerned with sound. Basho's frog poem is primarily a poem about sound, the sound of the splash, and the silence that follows. Many of the most celebrated haiku are built around a single moment of auditory attention. The sound of a temple bell fading, the cry of a cuckoo in darkness, the sound of wind in dry grasses. These are not dramatic sounds. They are sounds that most people would walk past without registering. The poet stops. The poet listens. And in that listening, the sound becomes something more than itself. There is a practice in certain Zen temples of listening to rain in the same way that one might practice calligraphy or tea, with full, undivided attention as a form of meditation. The sound of rain on different surfaces, on stone, on wood, on water, on bamboo, on the broad leaves of certain plants. Each surface has its own voice. The rain does not change. What changes is the surface it falls on. And what is produced is a kind of quiet music that was not composed by anyone and cannot be repeated. I mention this because the sounds you are hearing now, the sounds of rain, of the gentle background that accompanies this narration, are not merely atmospheric decoration. They are, in the tradition we have been exploring, themselves a form of wabi-sabi, imperfect, natural, made by the meeting of water and surface, of air and distance. Not designed to be beautiful, but beautiful nonetheless. Let them be present to you as you settle further into the night. The word wabi-sabi, in the end, resists the kind of tidy definition we usually want from ideas. And this, I think, is appropriate. An idea about imperfection should not be perfectly defined. An idea about incompleteness should not be complete. It should leave some space, some for you to fill with your own experience, your own encounters with quiet beauty, your own cracks and golden seams. What wabi-sabi asks of us is not that we adopt a style. It asks that we slow down enough to notice the moss, to notice the quality of light at this exact hour, to notice that the old wooden table is more beautiful than the new one, not despite its age, but because of it, to notice the people in your life who have lived enough to show their wear, and to recognize that the wear is not what is wrong with them. It is what is true about them. There's a particular expression used in Japanese craft traditions, shokunin kishitsu, sometimes translated as the craftsman's spirit, which describes the quality of complete absorption in one's work, the willingness to spend years perfecting a single technique, to find within the apparently small and limited domain of one craft an inexhaustible depth. A soba noodle maker in Tokyo, who has spent 40 years perfecting the ratio of buckwheat to water, who makes noodles each morning with the same focused attention as the first morning, who will tell you without any particular pride that he is still learning. That person embodies something wabi-sabi, not because the noodles are imperfect, but because the practice is never finished, because there is always more depth to go to, because the mastery is not a destination but a direction. This quality of ongoing, humble engagement with a practice is very different from the perfectionism that drives much of modern achievement culture. Perfectionism says, I will be satisfied when I get it right. The wabi-sabi sensibility says, getting it right is not the point. The point is the quality of attention brought to each attempt. The beautiful failure teaches more than the successful performance. The cracked bowl that you repaired with gold is more precious than the unbroken one, because it carries within it not only its original making, but also its breaking and its healing. It has a fuller history. This is perhaps why the concept resonates so powerfully with people who encounter it in the middle of their lives. People who have accumulated enough history to have visible cracks, who have done enough living to have developed the particular texture that only time and experience can give. For the young, wabi-sabi can be an intellectual idea, a beautiful philosophy, a sensibility to aspire to. But for those who have lived into it, who have been broken and repaired, who carry the gold in their seams, it can feel less like a discovery and more like a recognition. Oh, this is what I have been. This is what I have been becoming. It asks us to consider the possibility that we, in our imperfection, in our transience, in our ongoing incompleteness, are not failures of the ideal. We are exactly what we are supposed to be. We are alive. We are changing. We are, in the very best sense, wabi-sabi. The night is quiet now. The rain is still falling outside. The same gentle rain, patient and unhurried. The same rain that has been falling on Japanese moss gardens for as long as there have been moss gardens to fall on. It falls on the cracked bowl and the golden seam. It falls on the old stone and the young moss that is only just beginning to choose it. It falls on everything equally, with the democratic tenderness that rain has always had. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to remember anything. Tonight, there is only this: the quiet, the rain, and the beauty of the imperfect thing, held gently in the dark. The stories we have traveled through tonight, from the ancient poets who first felt the ache of wabi, to the wandering Basho listening to frogs, to Rikyū holding his last tea gathering before the end. All of these stories live in objects and spaces and in the quality of attention that can transform an ordinary morning into something worth remembering. They live in the rough bowl, in the moss-covered stone, in the garden that has been growing since before anyone alive today was born. They live, perhaps, in you, in the places where you have been broken and repaired, in the accumulation of years that has given you a texture you did not have before, in the particular and unrepeatable shape that your life has taken. You are, in the oldest and deepest sense of the word, an original. Not a copy, not a performance. The real, imperfect, beautiful, transient thing. Let the night hold you now. Let the rain continue its quiet work. Let whatever thoughts are still moving in your mind begin, slowly, to settle, like silt in still water, like moss choosing a stone, like the silence after a frog jumps, which is deeper than the silence before. You are here. The night is here. Everything else can wait until morning. Now, please sit back and enjoy the gentle sounds of nature.